Social media as we know it has only existed for maybe 20 to 25 years. Some would argue that social media has made a positive impact on our society, while others would say the opposite. Where do you stand? Join us today as we dive into how social media should work in the life of a Christian.
Come on, you need a drink, partner. Expecting trouble? I'm always expecting trouble. What do you think you're smoking around here?
Stop it! You're acting like a child!
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Welcome back to the Happy Holy Hour. We are in our virtual studio. This is Tyler, and I'm here with Travis and Jared. Due to the Pennsylvania stay-at-home order, most of us have family working in the medical field and all of that, so we felt that we should record from separate locations. So if the audio is a little different today, that is why. We're testing out some new things. Say hi, Travis and Jared.
Hey, what's up?
Yo.
They're all here. Anyway, the boys are back in town, even though we're towns apart, right?
Mm-hmm.
So today we're talking about social media. This is an interesting one. It's social media as we know it is a relatively recent occurrence in our history as a church and even just, as people. So today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some strengths, some weaknesses, and ask ourselves some questions when thinking about social media. What does the Bible have to say about social media? It'll be fun to get down into, but first, before we get into that, guys, what are your thoughts? Do you guys use social media accounts? What kind of accounts do you use, and how do you use them?
So I have Facebook and Instagram are my main ones. I tried Twitter like twice. I've gotten the app, and I just don't have time for it. I haven't gotten into it. It was kind of a thing before I was on social media, but now it's coming back. But now I'm already so I don't have Snapchat, don't have TikTok right now. So I use it for work and also for ministry and my personal account. So I have one, like for Instagram, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 accounts that I manage. So it gets really overwhelming sometimes.
Back in the day, I had a MySpace.
Whoa.
But I don't have that anymore. Yeah, that's a throwback. Now I just have a Facebook, and that's pretty much all that I have, and I'm barely on that.
Yeah, I would say out of the three of us, Jared, you're the most disconnected on social media.
That.
Yeah, me too. I'm like, man, I wish I could do more of that. I use Facebook and Instagram. Yeah, I do. I use Facebook and Instagram for the most part. I tried Twitter, but I got my account deactivated twice because I was never on it. So Twitter shut me down. I tried TikTok and wasn't a fan at all. But yeah, Facebook and Instagram is where I typically hang out, but it's mostly because I work in the marketing field. So I kind of have to be on those platforms to help take the company I work for, forward. But so I'm on those quite a bit. So as we think about social media, as it relates to the life of the believer, there's some principles that we can live by or questions that we can ask ourselves. We'll get to that a little later on in the podcast. But right off the top of your head, guys, what are some strengths that you find in social media? They could be obvious, they could be not so obvious, but specifically relating to the believer, what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, I think in a way it's another platform to be a witness, to share the gospel with people. People who may not normally have an opportunity to do so. So it may be people you don't know as well, or people in other countries that you're not able to get to, or it may just be another opportunity to share with people in your everyday life. If they're logging on, so they're seeing what you're posting. So, in that sense, it's just another avenue to share the gospel and be a testimony and witness to people.
I think in our personal lives, I know we all do the same thing where we have a group chat that we all send our morning devos and talk about how we can be praying for each other. And I think that's a really good strength for social media.
Yeah, we have our small group that's the way we've been connecting lately. I mean, thinking through the COVID-19 situation, social media has been the way that the church has even gathered. So I've been finding that specifically coronavirus, this time period, I've been really impressed by the resilience of the church and the strength of the church as we meet, even virtually. And social media has played a huge part in that. I've seen a lot of really encouraging things. One of my favorite part about Sundays now is at every hour of the day, there's a church feed on my Facebook, on my Facebook timeline. So that's been really cool to see.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of providential during this time that God's, allowed this other way that we can connect. But I feel like for me personally, I've felt during this time just social media burnout because just everything's so flooded because people are turning to social media to be the means of communication. And so I just found myself on it so much. And after a while, you kind of start you can only engage in it so much. I feel like the streaming on Sundays, but above and beyond that, it's hard to engage because part of the reason is I'm on it so much for work and everything like that. So by the end of the day, I'm like, okay, I do not want to be, but I think part of it is just we're flooded with social media right now and people can only take so much of it. I know that we talk about that a lot in our business planning, ministry planning, like when we're trying to figure out what we're going to do for ministries in the future, we're trying to figure out, is it even worthwhile doing virtual ministries because it's hard to get in front of people and people are just burnt out, social media burnout right now.
I think it's really funny because I'm the opposite. I'm usually never on social media, but now that it's the only real way to connect with people. I'm on Facebook Messenger all the time and going on Facebook Live to be with the church, and it's so backwards for me.
So one of the reasons social media in and of itself was really created, I know initially, was for the purpose of staying in touch with, say, long lost friends, those that you don't get to connect with in person regularly. Have you guys found that to be true on social media? Do you use Facebook or Instagram to actually keep in touch with those friends, or do you use it for a different purpose?
So personally, I don't feel like I use it that way that often, mostly just because most of my peers don't seem to be using it that way. One thing I've seen is people maybe our parents' ages or older tend to actually use it the way it was originally created. You see them connecting with their college friends and, high school friends and all these long lost friends and stuff like that. But I don't see that happening that often with us. Maybe part of the reason is there's not as many years that we've been disconnected. But even people I went through college with who were my friends, I really don't use it that often as a means to connect with them, people I normally wouldn't be able to connect with. And maybe that's just a fault on mine not being as intentional as a friend as I should be. I don't know. Yeah,
I would agree with you, Travis. I mean, I don't think there's anyone on my Facebook that I haven't seen in the last month.
Yeah, I've been using social media mostly to connect with those who I friend on Facebook are mostly just band guys that I want to network with. So it's even just to expand my reach. It hasn't necessarily been to keep in touch with old friends. It's more so just to create new connections. So for me, it's been used that way.
Yeah, I would say I'm the same way because I've been using it for our podcast or for other ministries. So it's more of a networking tool and a opportunity advancement, ministry advancement tool, kind of moving forward, making more connections, expanding your audience versus kind of connecting with people from the past. Although I do some of that, but mostly it's because I'm, putting information about the ministries I'm involved in and stuff like that.
Yeah. The whole idea of expanding your network, it can be a strength, but it can also be a weakness. More and more nowadays, I'm finding that there are, the influencers out there they have this massive network in terms of connections. They have like thousands and thousands and millions of followers. And a negative I see in that is you can be so consumed with building that follower base that real life almost becomes something you put on the back burner, and your new real life becomes virtual. That's been an interesting thing I've been noticing.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch that trend with just Christian influencers or even like pastors and things like that, where a lot of what we do, our messages or our services or, all sorts of things is more tailored towards how will it appear on social media and how will people who I don't even know react to it and things like that. So in one sense, that could be positive, like your sermon could be heard around the world, and shared and stuff like that. But I think we've lost the value of like, just because it's an unknown pastor doesn't mean he's not a good preacher or something like that. The small parishioner, and that unknown rural church that doesn't have any followers, we kind of like look down on that, even though he might be just as skilled expositor of the word.
Yeah. And so like when I was in college, I took a whole class on the digital age and kind of identity in terms of social media. And it's actually mind-blowing how much people get wrapped up in their virtual identity. In sociology, we called it the self. So basically, your virtual self at one point becomes another version of you. And a lot of times you can dump so much into that virtual self that it becomes you. And then when you focus on that so much, the real you kind of falls back by the wayside. And that's such a dangerous thing, I think, because when you focus so much on the screen and your online presence and the immediate gratification of likes and followers, you miss so much happening around you in the real world. You miss the breeze outside, the birds chirping, and like even the influencers that travel and you see the great pictures that they post. It's like, I wonder how much they actually enjoyed that rather than actually, like, were they trying to get an amazing picture more than they were just enjoying the scenery around them? It's very interesting.
Yeah, it was there's that famous picture. I don't know if it's like the Pope, when the Pope came to town or something, but it was like before there were cell phones and everybody like watching him and engaged in that actual event that was occurring before their eyes. And then like fast forward 10 years and everybody had their cell phones out, was looking through the experience through their screens, taking pictures, taking videos, same place, same kind of event, just totally different time. And yeah, like who really experienced the experience better.
So I would even venture to ask, is that a social media issue or is that a technology
issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know if I can answer that, but I mean, I actually would say that it's more of a heart issue, like us desiring the immediate gratification of expanding our networks and getting likes and stuff like that and getting comments. Technology, I think, has just enabled us to feed that side of our carnal desires even more on a exponential rate.
Yeah, I always wondered too, like we are as a society, we're pushing technology for like the better and better experience, like getting it closer and closer to real life. You got the virtual, technology, and it'll be interesting to see what they come up to next. But I wonder, like, does that ever replace the real thing? Like we're trying to get our videos better and better or whatever, but that doesn't substitute actually being physically there. And that's what I've been feeling even throughout the social distancing thing. Like all of this stuff we're doing, which is good stuff to do, but it's just not the same as being physically present with people, physically there on Sunday or all these different things. I think this time really brings that truth out, that technology doesn't replace the actual thing. It's not bad in and of itself, but I don't think it will ever be quite the same.
So what you're asking is, will we ever be able to build a tower to the heavens?
Or just like a hologram, like...
Yeah. Something like that.
We'll end up building a tower to the moon, and then the Earth is just going to be like dragging the moon around with a building attached to it. It'll be fun.
It'll be a bridge. That
was a really dumb comment that I made. Redacted. When thinking about when thinking about this idea. I love John Piper has a quote, and I found it earlier this week as we were talking and thinking about what social media should look like in the life of the believer. John Piper says, social media can seduce us into finding our approval and satisfaction from the attention we receive. And like, how true is that? Like, it can be so easy to say, you know, I'm feeling kind of lonely today. I'm going to post a picture on Instagram, get a bunch of likes, and my ego is going to be boosted. You know, it can be so easy to fall into that trap. But our approval and what our satisfaction is in shouldn't be that. It should be in the Lord.
Yeah. And I think another big issue that it does pose is that not only does it give you that immediate satisfaction of like hearing from other people and boosting your ego, but it also does, like you were saying earlier, it distracts you from what's around you. It distracts you from the truth. That's a dangerous game to play.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think like maybe it distracts us too from the people who really matter. Like, it's a good thing that we're able to do this podcast and share the gospel and to help people with their walk with the Lord, people we don't even know, people all around the world. But, you know, if we're so focused on this, or I think of like pastors, if they're so focused on people outside of their church building, like their main focus has to be the people actually in their congregation. And for us, it's the people in our immediate lives, you know, our spouses, our significant others, our family, you know, our kids. So sometimes I think like a good thing can become a bad thing when we're focused on ministering to those people that we don't even know, and that takes us away from the people who are right around us who need us too.
How often do you find yourself with like your spouse or with your friends and you get a lull in time, and then all of a sudden everybody's scrolling now, like they're going through their Facebook feed or their Twitter feed, or like, that's definitely something that I've noticed that's probably not a healthy thing to be doing. As Jared, I can see Jared scrolling through Facebook as we're...
Oh, wait, what? Sorry, what did you say?
But before we move on, first of all, do you guys have any other strengths or weaknesses in terms of social media before we move on to biblical wisdom?
Well, I think this probably will come up in biblical wisdom, but I would just say like one weakness I've seen is that when we are on social media, we tend to loosen the constraints of what we say and how we would say things. You know, sometimes we say things on social media that we would never dare say in person. And so we lower the standards a little bit. And I think that's really unhealthy, because social media gives us such a broad audience and broad reach. You know, we could say something in private to one person, and that would, you know, that's not right, which is not a good thing. But to say it on social media and you realize that has 200 views, so that same thing you could have said in private is now out there for everybody to see, and that's reflecting on you and your testimony. So I think that would be a negative, probably one of the biggest negatives I've seen, and something I think is actually a really serious issue. Yeah.
And another negative that I would see is when you're on social media, and this isn't strictly social media, but it is on there, is you are not in full control of what you are viewing, and there's really no accountability on that. So you could be scrolling through and something will pop up and it could cause you to fall into sin. And that's one of the biggest, I think, downfalls that I could see in social media.
Sorry to add one more thing, but I was just thinking about this the other day, is also when we post on social media, we're not in control of who sees it and how they're going to react. You know, if I can say something, my opinion to somebody I know and trust, I know how they're going to react. I know the things that are going on in their lives. So there's sometimes when I would say something to somebody, but I know that they're going through something, somebody else is going through something. So I'm not going to say that same thing to them. And so that's why I've held off with all this stuff going on with the COVID situation. People feel like they have to post their opinion one way or the other. We need to open up the economy. We need to stay shut. And that's fine for us to have our own opinions, but with such a complex issue, people are going through so many things. And so somebody if I post that, someone may view that and their family member is dying from COVID. So imagine how that makes them feel. So we don't have control on who's viewing it on the other end and what they're going through. So I tend to try to stay away from certain issues that I would be comfortable sharing in person. Not to say that it's wrong to share those opinions, but we just have no control over who's going to see it and what they're going through. Whereas if we could share that controversial subject in person with people we know, it's a much better place to dialogue in that fashion.
We also don't have control over how we're perceived. When we're in person, we have the ability for nonverbal cues and communication, whereas online, there's no cues. There's no nonverbal cues. It's all just what you type. You can't even get a voice tone in that. So yeah, there's definitely some red flags with social media, but as we talked about earlier, it can be used for such good things as well. Encouragement, church, connections with believers and family members and all of that. But I want to move us into talking about biblical wisdom on social media. And it's actually really just questions to ask yourself with some scripture to guide us in asking those questions. So question number one, and I think this is super important to ask ourselves, is, are you intentional with your time with God? Now, I know a lot of people, the first thing they do when they wake up in the morning is check Facebook or check Instagram, check the socials. So that is replacing time that you could be spending doing something else, mainly thinking about, mainly thinking about the Lord. John Piper says it like this: one of the great uses of Twitter and Facebook will be to prove at the last day that prayerlessness was not from lack of time. It hits hard. So are you intentional with your time with God? I'm curious. I kind of want to have a little discussion on each of these questions. What have your experiences been with this? Has social media took time away from you, or has it encouraged you to spend time with the Lord?
Mostly taken time away. There have been times where it's been edifying for sure, and been used to encourage me and grow my walk with the Lord, and been used for redemptive purposes. But more often than not, it's probably been a time waster. I think you brought up a good point about the first thing we do in the morning is check our social medias. I found myself doing that. Generally what happens is I have to kind of take a social media break and fast from it for a week or two, and those habits like quickly go away. But then after a month, they kind of start progressively getting worse, and you kind of have to pull back. But so I think that's a huge point, because we could check our social media in the morning and, oh my gosh, how much time flew by before you knew it. And now I don't have time to do my devotions in the morning, or we check it before bed. And I think, not saying we have to do our devotions in the morning or evening, but I think there is something about waking up and starting your day, setting your mind on the things of the Lord, and then before bed, setting your mind again, for your start and your finish of your day are rooted in the Word, and you're kind of renewing your mind. Whereas if we're checking social media, where's our mind going to be then?
Social media hasn't really taken time away from my dedicated times being with prayer and meditating on the Word, strictly because I'm never really on it anyway. But it has encouraged me to be more dedicated to making specific times to be in the Word and praying, especially like how I mentioned earlier that we do that group chat every morning. It's really encouraged me and kept me accountable for sending you guys what I've prayed or what I read in the morning, and just kind of excited to hear what the Word has encouraged you guys with. I look forward to that every morning. So I think,
and for me, it's been kind of more of a time waster, kind of what Travis was saying. But I'm going to point us to Colossians 4:5, just a simple verse of encouragement. Walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of the time that we have. So when thinking about social media and how you use it, is how you use it making the best of your time? When thinking about the best use of time, it should be thinking about the Lord, meditating on the Word. So is it taking away from your time? That's a question you should ask yourself. Number two, are you discontent after being on social media? for me, I would say this has been a big pain point for me, because when you're on social media, you see basically the abilities and the things that other people have, and it's just a carnal desire to covet that. And I know that's something that I've had to face, and it's like you have to really put on the brakes and understand what contentment is.
Social media really makes me think about in Ecclesiastes the whole theme of like how life is a vapor. And you see how much time people spend on, and with the mindset of like all of this is like basically meaningless. Like, do you want to spend that little vapor of time on that, or do you want to spend that little vapor of time doing something more beneficial?
Yeah, I would say I normally feel more like discouraged or depressed, or it rarely do I get on social media and I just feel so edified. The times that I do, it's more controlled, like where we are in our mutual edification station, our group chat, but just scrolling through my news feed or whatever, it's just kind of like sometimes I'm just like, why am I even doing this? And sometimes I feel convicted when I look up and like my kid's sitting there looking at me, like wanting to play. And I'm like, wow, I just like prioritize meaninglessness over spending intentional time with my kid, so there's just so many other better things I could be doing. So I guess if I were to limit my time to just posting like valuable content and then not scrolling through my phone to see what all the meaningless things people are posting, I'd be a lot better off.
Yeah. And one of the verses that we, with the company, with the ministry that I work with, that we preach about is 1 Timothy 6:6-7. And it says, godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into this world and we will take nothing out of it. Now, notice how it says godliness with contentment is great gain. It's not just gain. It's more than just gain. It's more than what we need. So we need to be content. And especially as we think about social media, having that refresh us, godliness with contentment is great gain. Okay, I don't need everything I see that comes up as a Facebook ad. Question number 3 that I have.
What is buy one, get one free?
Yeah. But Mom, I could buy this electric scooter for $5 off of the Wish app.
The store is closing.
The third question I have as we think about social media, and I think this one has the most contention with it, is do your posts, comments, shares, whatever it is, glorify God? And I noticed that people fight a lot on social media, a lot. And I'm guilty of that sometimes. But how does what we post glorify the Lord? How can we check that? What have you guys been experiencing with that?
I was just going to say, so I don't really post anything for that exact reason, because I want to be careful with my testimony. And every little word I say could be taken in the wrong way. So I really just try to shy away from it and use my wisdom and discernment. If I ever do post, what I'm saying is edifying, is God-centered, and is impactful.
Yeah, I've tried to be a lot more selective and maybe redemptive in what I've been posting, especially recently. Generally it's going to be scripture oriented or ministry oriented. I'm trying to think now, like 10 years from now, will I be ashamed or like embarrassed about what I posted? If I'm going to post things that are more comical, like normally now it's going to be in my story where like it's going to go away eventually. Not to say that I'm posting things on my story that I'm going to be ashamed I posted, 10 years down the road, but that I've reserved for like more comical, humorous, whatever. But like what I post on my newsfeed, I've tried to be a lot more selective with lately. So,
Facebook has the memories feature.
Oh, it's so cringy.
And I've had Facebook for 10 years now, so I can actually see the things that I posted. And today I was scrolling through my memories. 8 years ago, Pastor Josh Park posted 35 pictures of me because I took his phone and took a bunch of selfies. Yeah. that was what I did 8 years ago. It was just, it was bad. This is one thing that, 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whether you eat or drink, whatever you do it all for the glory of God. That scripture has come up multiple times on our podcast, and that's something that we want to echo over and over again. Whatever we do, we want to do it for God's glory, including our social media posts. The last question that I have is kind of more a reflective one, not one that we necessarily need to answer, but just to think about as we close out. Are you spending more time with God and others than you are on social media? What's taking up your time? If you spend 8 hours a day on social media, but only spend 2 hours a day socializing with your family and with your friends, and maybe 5 minutes with God, if that, there's an imbalance that, probably should get worked out, because social media can be very addicting. It can take you down into a black hole of gratification and self-satisfaction that's really hard to come out of. So just something to think about as we close out today, because we're running short on time.
It just makes me think of the words of Paul, and he said, all things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial. Facebook has some great things about it that we can use for the glory of God, but it's not always beneficial. It can sometimes be brought to ruin your testimony, or it can be brought to cause disconnection between people, or hatred even. So it's all about using discernment, I think.
I think it would just be beneficial maybe to just remember that we should be putting guidelines on our lives, safeguards, parameters, remembering our flesh is sinful and we, need to subdue it, and we need to be killing sin or it will be killing us. And so, maybe that's just simple parameters on social media. You don't check social media before you go to bed or in the morning. We've talked about this, no phones during mealtime. Until whatever, after my devotions are done, I don't check social media. So maybe for us, after I'm done with my devos, I get on a mutual edification station, post what I learned, and then it's okay to get on. And, after a certain point at night, it's, no devices. And that's when we're reading our books, getting ready for bed, whatever. So just simple, practical things like that. Put thought into it, be intentional about it instead of just mindlessly taking part in it.
Yeah, setting time limits, that kind of stuff, it helps a lot. So as we close out today, simple takeaway, as we've spent most of this time talking about our personal stories with social media and our own experiences, we want to give you a takeaway. And simply, we asked this question, and we've asked it before, but what do you treasure above all else? Is it Christ? If your smartphone could speak to your social media habits, what would it say? And that's a question that is, for me, just very convicting, for a lot of things, time, what comes across your screen, all of that. So what do you treasure above all else? If we treasure Christ above everything, that'll show in when we do our devos and how much time we spend, whether or not there's an imbalance between how much time we're spending with the Lord and our family and those around us, our neighbors that we're supposed to be loving, rather than self-gratifying in our phones. So whatever you do, whether you eat or drink, do all for the glory of God. If we're going to use social media, let's do it in a way that honors Christ and edifies believers and furthers the kingdom. So that's all we have for you today. Thank you for joining us on the first totally virtual Happy Holy Hour. This has been fun. Awesome. Well, join us next week on the Happy Holy Hour. We're going to be talking about the post-truth era, post-Christianity, and our experiences with that. It'll be an interesting discussion for sure. Have a great day, everybody.
See ya.
Peace out. Dig, dig, dig.